to welcome you to our event here at Upper House, a Theology of Community Development. My name is Daniel Johnson, and I'm a program curator here at Upper House. In this virtual event, Kelley Nikondeha will outline a theology of community development, useful to all people engaging in desiring a long-term work that aims for community-wide transformation. Engaging in biblical texts of the prophet Isaiah and Lamentations should provide a framework that's helpful for us to consider the long road between the failed urban economy of the old city and the aspirational work of every practitioner, which is you and me, to build a new city. She has a unique ability to weave scripture in stories that will shed light on subjects like economics, food security, healthcare, education, and advocacy. Let me tell you a little bit about Kelley Nikondeha. Kelley is the co-director and chief storyteller for Communities of Hope, a community development enterprise in Burundi. She's the author of Adopted, the Sacrament for Belonging in a Fractured World, a Christianity Today award winner, and recently published Defiant, What the Women of Exodus Teach Us About Freedom. Kelley also serves as theologian in residence for She Loves magazine. We want to welcome Kelley here today. Welcome, Kelley.
Well, thank you. It's so good to be with you today.
Awesome. Well, we are so grateful for you joining us from Arizona.
Yes.
Our Wisconsin weather is a little bit different than it is in Arizona. So we would just want to welcome you here. We're so grateful for your good work, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you today for this virtual event. Hey, just a couple things I want to highlight. There's a Q&A function. We would love to field some questions for Kelley for after her talk with us. So you can just put those into the Q&A function, and we'll have some time after her talk to discuss some of those questions with her. So I'm going to just hand it over to you, if that's okay at this point, and
Sure.
we'll let you share with us about community development.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. The first time that my husband and I met with fellow practitioners was in Uganda in 2007. And the keynote that we shared was based on the Jubilee texts. So the Jubilee texts, for those of you who are new to them, are found in Deuteronomy 15, Leviticus 25, the sweeping poetry that we see in Isaiah 61, and pulled all the way through by Jesus himself in Luke's 4th gospel. These are the texts that give us a really good picture of Jubilee. And so this was where my husband and I started in our theological exploration of community development. We were on the front end. We hadn't yet got deep in the work, but we were already doing the theological work to try and underpin our soon-to-be practice. And so, as we talked about Jubilee, our first foray into these texts, it's important to know that my husband is Burundian, born and raised in Burundi, which is a tiny country in the heart of Africa, typically slated as one of the poorest or most underdeveloped countries in the world. Matter of fact, this year, they were slated at the very bottom. And so he grew up in extreme poverty, that less than $1 a day kind of poverty. His dad was a United Methodist, or not a Free Methodist pastor and church planter, most often paid in chickens and mangoes, not money. And that is how he had to support his 13 kids. I, on the other hand, am a California girl. I was raised in Southern California and had all the luxuries that an upper middle class life offered. So we were reading the texts from very different social locations, you might say. And so the Jubilee texts talk about, actually it's economic policy. That's what it is, a concrete economic policy amazing that this was one of the first things that Jesus talked about in the public square, but that's a conversation for another time. But as we explored these Jubilee texts, it became clear, right, that the text talks about every 7 years there should be some kind of economic relief. But every 50 years was the big celebration. And what that meant was that on the 50th year, land was redistributed to original owners, debts were forgiven, people who were enslaved as part of their payback to their landlords were set free. It was a huge societal shift in the 50th year that had to do with land and labor and liberty, freedom. And I remember that as we would study these together, my husband said, wow, there is nothing that would be better news for my dad than to hear that his debts were forgiven, the big ones and the small ones. If somebody had stood up in the church and said, your debts are going to be forgiven, that is good news. Jesus knew what he was talking about. Now, I came from a different place in the social order. And I said, wow, my parents are the parents who own their own property. My parents owned other properties that they rented or that they flipped. Speculation was big in the 70s and 80s. My family would be the kind of family that would have to give back a land deed, would have to forgive debts and know that that money would never be repaid. Wow, that's hard news for my family. And so very quickly we learned Jubilee is both good news and hard news. And it really depended where you were as to how your family would have interpreted those words of Jesus. And in fact, when Jesus said them, when he pulled the Isaiah scroll out in Nazareth that day and he read this beautiful Jubilee text, the poor people who were listening would have been like, yes. But we see that later, when he was pulled aside and chatted with some of the Pharisees, who would have been more like me, upper class religious folks, they wanted to push him off a cliff. So these are really beautiful but challenging texts. But this is where we began our journey. And one of the things that my husband loved from the first is that after Jesus reads this text in the synagogue, he puts it down and he looks at everybody and he says, today, this is going to happen. Today, this is going to begin. It's as if Jesus was announcing his campaign, and it was a Jubilee campaign, right? I mean, right now we hear all about campaigns, whether it's at state level or the federal level, but it's like Jesus said, my campaign is a Jubilee campaign. And it's going to start today. And for my husband, that really started him thinking, wow, things should start changing in Burundi. Like, he was raised by his pastor father to think about salvation as being a ticket to a better place in the afterlife. It's hard here. There's poverty, malnourishment, AIDS was ravaging the country at the time. Civil war was ravaging the country. But if we follow Jesus, if we accept Jesus, in a sense, we have an evacuation plan. We have the promise of heaven. But my husband read this text and said, Jesus said that this should start happening now. Jesus doesn't have an evacuation plan. Jesus has a transformation plan, that we are going to transform the very landscape we live in today. And that to him was so energizing. So this was our theological point of origin as it comes to development work. Now, what grew out of this conversation in Uganda was our eventual move back to Burundi. We had started our marriage in California, but now we were going to be back in Burundi starting development work. And for the next 12 plus years, we would dedicate our life to this work. And that has included education and economics, healthcare, food security, human rights advocacy. I would take up too much time if I told you everything. What I learned right off is that my husband is quite an amazing practitioner. He is the fullest version of himself in Burundi. And boy, you love it when you see it. So the way that we often frame it, if you're if you meet us, is I'm the book smart and he's the street smart. I'm the theologian, he's the practitioner. And so we work these texts and this life together, where I'm always looking at how does the text inform best practices? And he's always looking at the reality on the ground and saying, well, how does that challenge how we understand the text and kind of complicate how we come to these biblical texts? So it is really, it's been a really beautiful part of the work to be doing both the thinking and the practitioner things together over these last 12 years. But let me tell you a few stories. So again, my husband's name is Claude. He's the Burundian. So I will just now refer to him as Claude and trust that you are tracking with me. So about a couple years into our work in Burundi, my husband had the opportunity to start a bank. World Vision had a microlending. They had a microlending program, and they were having some challenges with it. And so the end of the story is just that they gifted it to my husband and said, if you could kind of make this work, we'll just give you the certificate so you can kind of keep working the microfinance end of things. And so he took that and created a hybrid model, got it approved through the central bank in Burundi. It took about a year, but he opened up a real bank. And this bank was focused on the 97% of Burundians that are typically unbanked. People like his dad who never had a bank account their whole life because they never had enough money to open an account or to pay monthly fees on an account. But he opened a bank that focused on how do we help the people at the bottom of the pyramid get into the economy. How do I identify the business people, the people who can create jobs and services for their neighbors, and support them with more capital and just more infrastructure so that they can create jobs. Burundi has at the time, it was over 40% unemployment. And so my husband's like, I'm going to cut that in half because he's quite ambitious. He's ambitious for the sake of justice. So I'll allow it. But we started this bank and it's called Kazoza. Now in Kirundi, the native language in Burundi, Kazoza means good future. And that's what we believed, that if we could come alongside with economic support, we could help families move into a good future, that we could help neighborhoods move into a good future. So we are maybe 6 or 7 months into our first year. We have a couple of hundred people who are banking with us. And it's a Sunday morning, and his phone starts going off. And then his second phone starts going off. And then his third phone starts going off because he really did have 3 phones. Well, there was a fire in the marketplace. The marketplace is the central, it's the economic hub in Burundi. And Sunday morning, fire. The good news is that most people were in church, so there wasn't a lot of, there was minimal loss of life. But within 5 hours, the marketplace was gone. And that meant all those businesses, all those livelihoods were gone. Now, about 78% of our clients did their business in the marketplace. So Sunday night, we knew most of them would never be able to repay their loans. We also knew that we probably would have to close our doors because we were a young financial institution that just learned that about 78% of our people were not going to be able to repay their loans. It was a hard night. The next morning, my husband goes into the branch, and at the gate, there are about 40 women. They are distraught. Opens the gate, and he lets them come into the back patio. We have a big covered patio where we do a lot of meetings. The women sit, and they start to share what they've lost. And one of them kind of articulated for the sake of the group, on Saturday night, I went to bed as a businesswoman. I had a kiosk. I had inventory in the marketplace. I had a loan from the bank. Woo, I could pay school fees next week for my kids. But by Sunday night, I went to bed poor again because all of it was gone. And so Claude heard the women tell this story over and over, crying and weeping for the next set of hours. He had his staff like bring in Fantas and then a little later bring in some donuts because the women weren't done weeping and telling their stories, and more women kept coming and joining them. And this was pretty much the entire morning. Another time, a couple years later, there was a flood, overnight, heavy rains, and washed away. There was a huge mudslide, and it washed away a whole hillside and all the neighborhoods on it. And it came so fast and so furious in the middle of the night that the water rushed these homes into Lake Tanganyika, which is the big lake that Burundi sits on the edge of. And women, would tell Claude the next day, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. These people went to bed with their families and their homes, and they woke up the next day with nothing. And Claude woke up in the morning, heard the news, and drove out to the neighborhoods. The Red Cross was already setting up a camp for the displaced families. And so he went into the camp and was immediately attracted to a group of women. While they were putting up the tents and the latrines, he went over and sat with the women. And again, they were sharing, man, we went to bed. Everything was normal. And in the middle of the night, there was this rushing sound and everything was moving and shaking. And the water was moving so quick and fast that it actually made the mattresses flotation devices. And a lot of them shared that their little kids that were on the bed with them got pushed out on mattresses into the water, gone. And so these women were mourning the loss of children, the loss of their home, the loss of their neighborhood. And he just sat with them, again, for hours that morning, just listening to them, weeping with them. He got in his car and drove back 30 minutes into the city. And he told me later, he says, I was just asking God, what do I do? I mean, this isn't our work. This isn't our community. What am I supposed to do? And he just wept his whole way back to town. He gets into the office, and within a couple of minutes, there's a phone call, and it's the director of the Red Cross. And he asks Claude, we are desperate. We need more help. Any way that you and your team of people could set up another camp next to ours, we'll teach you how to do it, but we need more help. And so there was an answer, right? All of a sudden, we were part of the emergency relief crew alongside the Red Cross. We have I'm going to give you a third story. We have a large community, 660 families when we started. Now, not 660 people, but families. And in Burundi, families are anywhere from 8 to 10 is the average size family. So we're talking lots of people. And we had just started working with our Batwa friends. The Batwa are a small tribe in Burundi. And we decided to begin doing human rights advocacy, making sure that they all had identity cards. Most Batwa people are landless, not brought into the system. And so the first thing to get them on track was to get them their own identity cards, proof that they belong here. And so that takes a lot. I mean, right? Think about getting your identity card. We're talking photos and fingerprints and filling out forms. And these are people who've never been to school. So it took a lot of work for our team to come up and help get that many adults into the system. But my husband would go up with the team like twice a week. And he would notice that every time he was up there, there would be a funeral procession, a small little procession every time. And as he started paying more attention in the next week, he noticed that the caskets were really tiny. These were not adults that were being buried. These were tiny caskets. So about the third week, he left the group, his team, and he followed the procession to a little makeshift cemetery that they had. Lots of little tiny crosses. And after they were done with their little service, he sat with mostly mothers, and they told him about all the different crosses, all the different babies and mamas that had died. See, this is what poverty looks like. Because of malnourishment and lack of health care and lack of clean water, mothers and mainly children were not surviving childbirth. And he realized, man, we maybe need to rethink how we're proceeding to make sure that we're trying to help. I mean, we were early on in the process. I mean, we didn't have any health clinics or anything yet, but he's like, maybe we should put the mothers first. Maybe the mothers should get their ID cards first so that they can then get the government health care. He started thinking a little bit differently based on his time. But when he told me this final, like by the time I heard this story, he came home and we were talking about the women, something clicked for me. Something came into focus. So now I'm going to take you into the Isaiah text. So Isaiah is a big book. It was not written by one man, and it wasn't written all at once. So for any of you out there who do biblical studies, it was written by Isaiah, and then probably in subsequent seasons, some of his disciples and community members over hundreds of years. So scholars will talk about Isaiah in three parts: first, second, and third Isaiah. First Isaiah 1 to 39, talks about the loss of the city, and the city is Jerusalem. When we read chapters 1 to 39, the prophet Isaiah tells us the ways in which Jerusalem was coming apart. It was falling apart due to greed, corruption, and all manner of injustice. It's like you could just see the fissures in the city. This urban economy was coming undone. The Assyrians would come in and attack Jerusalem. And by chapter 39, we're told that the Babylonians are on the horizon and that the Babylonians will come in and destroy the city, destroy the temple, and will take people away in captivity. So it's a pretty dismal part of the story. But what we get when we read those chapters is a catalog of loss. This is the way in which the city isn't working well. This is a way in which the structures and the systems aren't serving the community well. The economy, the healthcare apparatus, food security, these things are not working well. And we can see it in the forms of greed, corruption, and injustice. But when you come to the end of chapter 39, before you turn the page to chapter 40, you have to recognize that there are about 100 to 130 years between Isaiah 39 and Isaiah 40. But what happens in that span of time is that the book of Lamentations was written. Now, the book of Lamentations is 5 poems about grief, graphic, gut-wrenching grief, unrelenting grief. My favorite Old Testament scholar, Walter Brueggemann, calls this the grief work of the Old Testament. And they're lamenting the destruction of the city when Babylon came in 587 BCE and did, in fact, destroy the city, destroyed the temple, took away all the elites, the government functionaries, the celebrities, the popular crowd. All of them were carted off to Babylon and just left a burnt out city, and all the riffraff, all the have-nots were all left behind. And so Lamentations is the grief work, the expression of loss. My God, what happened? We have lost our entire way of life. You can think of 587 BC like the 9/11. of the Old Testament. And so here was their poetry responding to losing everything. And one of the drum beats, as a matter of fact, this phrase happens about 7 or 8 times in the first chapter of Lamentations. None to comfort. There is none to comfort, none to comfort, none to comfort. There's nobody to bear witness to our grief. There's nobody to comfort us. Nobody cares, nobody sees, nobody understands. We are lost and we are invisible. And there is barely a word of hope in those 5 poems. Their losses and their grief is so deep. It is that deep expression of pathos, of emotion. But then we get to Isaiah 40. So second Isaiah, probably written by disciples and followers of Isaiah the prophet, is Isaiah 40 to 55. And it begins, comfort, comfort my people. Tell them that it's time to come home. It's like a direct answer to the deep grief that we hear in Lamentations. You say that there's no one to comfort you, but I'm telling you, comfort has come at long last. The social situation, the political situation in Babylon had changed. Of course, Caesar's leaders, kings come and go. And there had been enough of a change that God was able to bring them home, to repatriate the Israelites. I mean, of course, remember, they had been living there. They had started families there. But now they get to come home to Jerusalem. And so here we get some of the most beautiful poetry in the entire Old Testament, as far as I'm concerned. I remember growing up singing songs, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, right? Or the trees of the hills will clap their hands. Well, that's all in response to the news that we get to come home. The trees are clapping their hands because they see the Jews coming home to Jerusalem. It's a celebration. It's a return. It is hope. This is what hope looks like. And then we move on to the final part of Isaiah, third Isaiah, which is Isaiah 56 to 66. The hard work of rebuilding the city. This is where Isaiah gives us a vision for the new city, for the new Jerusalem. And he talks about this is a conversation about what could the new city look like. And it begins early on with God saying, do justice. The old city was falling apart because of injustice. The cornerstone of the new city has to be do justice. And from that place of doing justice, we can talk about healthcare policy and worship and a better economy, but it all has to be founded on justice. So this is a big sweep. But if I were to summarize it in 4 chapters, 4 headings, we're looking at loss, lament, hope, and hard work. This is the arc that we get from the old city to the new. So remember, I told you about my husband who spent a good amount of time weeping with women who had lost everything in a marketplace fire, women who had lost everything in a flood, women who were burying their children or their neighbors' children due to poverty and all the injustices associated with it. There was something about watching my husband sit with the women where what finally clicked for me was that he was entering into lament. He was entering into the pathos of these women or these communities, because often women are the ones that go first when it comes to putting those raw emotions out there. Even in Lamentations, what we see is the daughter of Zion. The speaker is personified as a woman, listing her grief. So what clicked for me was that he goes to the places of deep pain in these communities, and he sits and he bears witness to their loss. He doesn't argue it away. He doesn't try and tell them, oh, don't worry, it's going to get better. He listens. He bears witness. He weeps with them. He absorbs the pain that they are experiencing. Now, this isn't necessarily a strategy, certainly not a formula. I'm not telling you that if you weep with people, you're going to have a solution for them on the other side. And yet, somehow it is a pattern. And somehow we see it in Scripture. There is something that happens, and right now I'm just going to focus in. Like I said, we have loss and lament and hope and hard work. I want to look at the kernel, which is lament and hope. You know, sometimes we talk about hope like it's a wish. I hope things will get better, right? Recently, I was with Barbara Brown Taylor, and she was saying, you know, there's hope. We often think of anticipatory hope, you know, anticipating that things will be better, like putting on our ruby slippers. But she said, really, hope is participatory. It's like putting on your cleats, lacing up and getting ready to run a race. And that, to me, names the kind of hope that we see in Isaiah, right? That we're going to have to do some things. Hope is new ideas. It's energy, gathering up energy to do something new in response to the loss and lament. But here's the thing. In my mind, it's like a match. You know, when you have a match, it has to strike against something. What I've learned from Isaiah and from our work is that the suitable substance for that match of hope is lament. And there was something that when my husband kept going and sitting with the women, hope, something, his lament with those women, it was the suitable substance that the Spirit was able to use to generate new ideas, new initiatives, new possibilities, things that wouldn't have come about had he not been in that space. So, these women who cried at the end of their business when the marketplace was gone, when he sat with them, I remember him coming home later that day and we were talking and I said, well, Jubilee means we should just forgive their debts. And he's like, well, I'm a banker. If I do that, I will lose my credentials with the central bank. So we have to think of another way to do it without losing, right? So the realities of doing development. So when we leaned into the text, we're like, well, wait a minute. Part of the Jubilee imperative is that nobody should be permanently locked in poverty. That's why every 50 years, there was this recalibration of society. It's like God knew that the rough and tumble of the economy, every 50 years, things happen. You have a bad harvest or somebody dies and you lose your breadwinner. But every 50 years, people should get a chance to get back into the economy. Nobody should be permanently locked out. And so we realized, Jubilee means we should work really hard to get all of those women and everybody else in our community back into the economy. And so for the next 4 months, that's what they did. All hands on deck, everybody that worked in our bank, all the people, hundreds of our people, not just those women, but other people lost too, right? They just worked really hard to get them all back in. One-on-one meetings, loan officers, individual plans. Do you need longer to repay your loan? Do you need a fresh infusion of cash to bring in more? What do you need to help get you back in? 4 months later, all of our people were back in the economy in one way or another. And we had to have our friends in Texas help support us with an infusion of capital. We had other friends locally who helped do fundraising for some of the most at-risk lenders to raise collateral. We had, we just did everything we could to get these people back into the economy. And while we were doing that, the thing that we weren't paying attention to really was the front door. You know, we still had, a bank branch. What happened is we got 800 new members. It was like this odd thing where our bank actually grew because people were like, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of a bank that didn't close their doors like so many others, but who worked harder because they wanted us all back in the economy and they believed in us. And so there, in an odd way, that marketplace fire, and what happened allowed God to grow something in us in terms of our understanding of Jubilee, of economy, of what we were meant to be doing in Burundi with these families. Now we've had the bank for many years. We have over 40,000 members, 8 bank branches. We're opening up another one this year. The good work continues, creating, support for business people in Burundi. So that's right. The families that lost everything in the flood, not only did we end up having a camp for the displaced, but in conversation with these women, and in conversation with some of our friends in Texas, we were able to rebuild an entire neighborhood of 70 homes. We kind of took on the project. And over the next year and a half, we rebuilt 70 homes from the ground up, good foundations, working with really good contractors and engineers and architects, good homes. That now when it rains in Burundi, we never worry about Katumba. We know that they're safe. We know that they're not going to slide down the mountain. But that wasn't part of our plan. But there again, that match was struck because my husband was willing to sit and cry with these folks. And when he drove away, like I said, he had no idea. He's like, I don't know how we help them. Do we try and raise money for food for them? Do we, he had no idea what ended up becoming a neighborhood revitalization program. And for those little tiny caskets, as I told you, we were beginning work in this community, Bubanza. And so all the women, we made sure the women got their ID cards first so that they could then go and get health care. And we started working on birth certificates for all the most sick babies, prioritizing them so that they could go with their mamas and get health care. And over the next set of years, we ended up building a school and a health clinic and had a feeding program with fortified porridge. And every time we would do these things, we would always bear in mind how we could support women and the youngest children. If there was a feeding program, well, let's make sure that the pregnant ladies and the lactating mamas and the little kids get to go in with the students and eat, or if we have a health clinic that serves the school, but of course we're going to make sure that the nurse has some time for all of these mamas, right? I mean, it was one of those things where just little by little, we wanted to be aware. I mean, maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates in Burundi, again, terrible. But we just little by little kept at it. And I remember one afternoon, or morning rather, I was sitting with our head nurse, Lydia, and we were going over the monthly numbers because I was writing a report for our friends in the US. And she's like, we didn't lose any babies this month. No babies died this month. And then I saw her flipping back. She's like, Kelley, we haven't lost any babies in a year. 12 months. We haven't lost a single baby in 12 months. And then she flipped back again. We haven't lost any women. We haven't lost any mothers in childbirth in the last. We started weeping. I ran upstairs to my husband's office and I said, you are not going to believe this. In the last year, no babies have died in Bubanza. No mothers have died. We glimpsed the new city where babies don't die. It's one of the things that Isaiah says that happens in the new city is that babies don't die prematurely. And I was like, we are glimpsing the new city where babies don't die too soon because of the injustices of the system. It took us 5 years. But very seldom do we lose a baby or a mama in Bubanza anymore. Very seldom. Because we have infrastructure to give them clean water and fortified porridge and health care and all the things that help them thrive. Because there's a little glimpse of the new city. There's a little foretaste of it when you go into Bubanza now. And I share this with you because I think for those of us who do long-term work, I found that a lot of people over the years didn't have a unifying theory, a unifying theory of the case. I guess as somebody who is a thinker and a theologian, I'm always looking for that. But I would talk to friends who, I have friends who work in Haiti, and they do maternal health care. And I remember asking, what is kind of your toehold? What is the verse or how do you theologically understand your work? And they gave me a verse about peace, making peace. And I'm like, it's a beautiful verse out of Corinthians about peacekeeping. But how does that connect with your work in the maternity ward? Or and I found that happening as I would talk to different people who were working to rehabilitate women in the red light district in Rwanda, or we were talking to people who were dealing with HIV/AIDS in the slums in Kenya. There was this inability to there wasn't this larger understanding for what is the theology that undergirds our work? And for us, over the last 12 years, this has become our theory of the case, theologically speaking, is that we want to rebuild the old city that was riddled with injustice, right? That we want to convert the old city of injustice to the new city that's founded on justice. So a lot of people do the work of conversion, right? You've probably heard lots of stories about missionaries who go across the world and they are saving souls for Jesus. But when you're doing community development work, you're dealing with the stuff of life, in the sense that you're dealing with agriculture and human rights and economies and wells and food, right? We don't have a discipleship program. We do development work. But this is what we are doing. We are converting the city from the unjust society to a just society. That is our call as development practitioners. And when we understand that we are going from loss to lament to hope and to hard work, that has helped us for the last set of years, especially in the last 4 to 5 years once we named it. Because what we see is that we kind of keep going back and forth. It's not like once you get to hard work, that's it. Sometimes you cycle back to lament because bad things happen. This has been a hard year. Coronavirus hit Burundi. We had the unexpected death of our long-term president, and so there was political upheaval. Our economy in Burundi is in free fall. You cycle back to having to re-articulate the loss, what systems aren't working, what injustices are getting in the way of our work and the healthy life of the people here, the families here. There is fresh grief to process, but there's also the fresh work of the Spirit to create new ideas, new hope, new things to do, and then much hard work. And so I give this to you as people who are also engaged in long-term work, whether it's pastoring a community, whether it's you're a social worker working in your community, you are a educator who's getting people all the way through elementary school, or you're getting them all the way through university. We're doing long-term work. We're not doing sprints in a couple of months. We're doing long-term, multi-year work. And this has helped us to have a long-term vision of understanding this is, the reality, loss and lament are the realities that we name. On the other side of the arc, hope and hard work, that's us trying to lean into a new reality, to imagine and embody a new reality. That's what we're doing. Whether you're doing it as a pastor or an educator or a medical professional, this is the work that we do. And Isaiah and Lamentations become deep theological resources for us. And I have found all the other little verses, come on. You can just tell that I love the Old Testament, I guess. But all the other verses somehow fit into this structure for us. And so I know I'm right at the edge of my time, but this is what funds our work. This is kind of the best theological foundation that we have found to articulate the theology of our long-term development work in Burundi. And I think that it tracks with the long-term work that we're doing here too. You guys can ask more questions or you can challenge that, but this is my gift to you, is Isaiah and Lamentations as a way for us to talk about and understand the long-term work of transforming broken cities into ones that are just ringing with justice and goodness for the families and communities that live there.
Awesome. Well, so great to that camera's not on.
Hello. I'm still here. I can't hear you, Dan, but I'm still here.
Okay, there we go. Back on.
Oh, good. I thought it was just me.
No, you're good. Camera shut off. So
Okay.
we'll fix some stuff here. But hey, just wanted to throw a question out to you. You mentioned this just briefly, and then we'll get to some other questions here. But can you speak a little bit to how COVID has impacted your work in Burundi? I think it's been kind of a theme for all of us in these last few months. And then
Sure.
what lessons have you learned from this experience with COVID that you guys are thinking about more long-term? So a lot of some of the long-term vision and work. Just curious on kind of some of the lessons you've learned, how it's affected your work in Burundi, and what you would share for us as a community.
Sure. Well, let me start off by saying that the lessons we learn usually are not lessons that are learned in months, but learned in years. So I am not joking when I say that development work is, we learn in multiple years. We usually don't know what is really working or not working until we're 5 years into a project. I mean, we've kind of learned that it almost takes that long to do trial and error and have your theory tested and to have the community engage with you about what works, what doesn't work, and to really see what is going to be unleashed and become formative. I mean, it takes a long time. So all that to say that we're very new into COVID and trying to see what that is going to mean long-term for our community. I can tell you that COVID hasn't hit Burundi as hard as it has hit the US. Surprisingly, we were quite scared because the conditions in Burundi with people living in crowded spaces, not having good health care, some cultural things that we just thought everything's working against us, and we were quite fearful. But for whatever reason, it hasn't hit Africa in quite the same way. And there are lots of different epidemiological theories as to why that might be. It might be the age of the population, might be the climate. We don't know yet. We had a season, though, where I'd say a good 6 to 8 weeks where we were noticing hospitals were impacted, cemeteries were showing the loss, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of just having burials on Saturdays and Sundays, there were multiple burials, all 7 days of the week. So there for a while, we were seeing it. Now we have one of the things we have is a trade school where we teach young adults skills. And so all of our tailors learned how to make masks. And we made masks like that beautiful African block fabric. They were really gorgeous, but made masks and gave them out to everybody we could. Everybody in our enterprises, all the families that we worked with, and tried to educate them about using masks. We also, one of the things in our trade schools, we do soap. We make bars of soap. We had almost all of our students learning how to make soap. And there again, every family we worked with, all the families we banked with, they're again talking about health and hand hygiene to try and mitigate the virus in our communities and with the families we work with. So part of it was just leveraging what we had for the sake of the community, right? I mean, that seemed like the most basic thing. That was the first thing we did. We also worked with the World Health Organization. Early on, we had them come into our health clinic and our elementary school and do trainings and, how do we recognize and respond to COVID? How could the school be changed into a health clinic auxiliary if we had to? So, that was just the basic stuff, which we've seen people doing here in the States as well, right? Using what we have to help one another. I think one of the unexpected things for us is we also have a cereals factory. We produce fortified porridge. And we have been producing about 20 tons a week. And some of that goes to the marketplace. It's packaged and sold right along, the cream of wheat and the oatmeal, et cetera, for middle-class Burundian families and expats. And then the other half we sell in bulk to NGOs or giving to vulnerable communities. So we sell half and then we give the other half away. Well, when COVID hit, the airport was closed, the borders were closed. And so importing the products from Nestle and France Soleil and other big companies, imports were gone. So our fortified porridge, our version of cream of wheat, was the only thing to put on the shelves. So we actually had this unexpected boon, this unexpected demand for our product. Also, NGOs typically bring in their fortified products from Kenya and Tanzania, but they couldn't be bringing anything in with the borders closed. And there again, we had the opportunity to then produce more so that we could serve the NGOs. So UNICEF, World Relief, World Vision, we kind of stepped in and started helping meet the need for them so that they could continue to serve their communities. So we went from producing 20 tons a week to producing 60 tons a week. And my husband says by the end of this year, by mid-December, we'll be up to 100 tons a week that we're producing in order to help respond. We wonder if that might be one of the lasting effects of COVID for us, is that now we have been producing more, we've been networking more with local NGOs and local distributors, and we're wondering if that might be one of the ways, at least for us, that we're going to have long-term lasting effect in terms of being able to provide fortified foods. I know my husband was just with the new first lady of Burundi this week, and her initiative is to really lean into malnourishment in Burundi, and she loves our fortified porridge, and so highlighted it when she was meeting with all of her, the media, et cetera. So we're hoping that will open a new opportunity for us to feed Burundians with fortified. So fortified porridge is like cream of wheat and a multivitamin together. Is that what we're talking? So that might be one of the lasting effects for us in how we get to serve our community. But like I said, we're not even a year into this. So that's just my best guess. And I don't know how that tracks with us here in the States.
Yeah. Awesome.
Was that too much?
That's great. No, that's perfect. That's really good. So we have a question from Doug Hunt, and you outlined kind of this lament, hope, hard work kind of sequencing. And so his question really is around when does kind of the lament get completed that you can kind of transfer into hope and then into the hard work? Is there some places or systems or things that you're looking for when those hit to be able to do that?
Yes. Doug, that is the $60 million question. Here's the thing. As I said, lament is not a formula, right? It's not like if I go and cry with people, a solution will be waiting for me when I get back to town. Or if I do this for 3 weeks, I'll start to see a new opportunity emerge. It's a pattern that we've seen in the text. It's a pattern we've seen in our Burundian context, and other practitioners have noticed it similarly when we've had these conversations. You just cannot put a time frame on lament. And that is part of what makes it so mysterious, and why there is no other language for me other than to say that it is the work of the Spirit that moves us out of lament and into hope. That when that match strikes, it really is a work of the Spirit. And sometimes it happens quick, like my husband driving 30 minutes into town and there being a phone call. That was quick. I almost wonder, though, if it was because those families didn't have time to wait and the Spirit just energized something right away. But other times, it takes a much longer period of time to be in that space of lament. It takes as long as it takes. And you can't rush through lament. There are no shortcuts through it. And I think we only know we're coming out of it when new ideas start to emerge. What if we tried this? Or you meet new people who have an idea and you're like, oh, that connects with, and you start talking and conspiring and realizing, oh, maybe there's something new we can try or do here. It's somehow this energy starts gathering, new ideas, this ability to imagine newness, and this willingness to try new things. And it's like, oh, well, usually that's the sign that you're on the far side of lament and starting to move into hope, the participatory kind of hope. But I can't give you anything more than that, because I think different times it has looked different for us, the ways in which we have moved out of it. But the deepest work we've done, though, I can almost always find the taproot in some experience of lament. So I wish I could give you something more than that. As a practitioner doing it 12 years, you would think I could, but that's just the reality. It is a work of the Spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, this actually kind of ends our formal time with you for this talk, but I wanted to outline a couple other talks that you're going to be doing with us both this evening and tomorrow. So the first talk is tonight is on her book Adopted, and we'd encourage you, if you're interested in that at all, or if you have friends or family that would be interested in that, it's going to be a great, as you can tell, Kelley is passionate about Scripture and the weaving of the adoption narrative kind of all throughout Scripture. And it's just a beautiful book. And so she's going to be giving an overview of that as well. And then tomorrow, we're going to be diving into her Defiant book in the morning, 10 a.m. And we'd love for you to join us there as well. Both of her books are actually on Erdman's, and our friends at Erdman's have given a 40% discount to anyone for Kelley's events these 2 days. So if you go to erdmans.christianbook.com and you use the promo code UHHouse40, that will give you 40% off of either her books. So either the Adopted book, which is featured here, or for the Defiant book there. So either of those, we are so grateful for our friends over at Erdman's and willing to give you guys 40% off of either of her books. So, well, good. Well, I just want to say thank you so much. That was an amazing, rich, theologically deep, spiritual, formative talk, and we're so grateful for your good work and your husband and all the things that you're doing in Burundi. We're so grateful for that. So make sure to check out upperhouse.org for all of our events. We'd love to see you at a future event. Thanks. God bless. Have a great day.